Hello everyone. Here we are back in History Surfer. This is Dr. A. I'm going to talk about Impressionism, PostImpressionism, and Symbolism today. This will be a lecture that my class will be getting at the same time, so it should be somewhat interesting. And we'll begin with Impressionism. Okay, well, when we start with Impressionism, Impressionism is probably, in my opinion, and remember this is indeed my opinion, and opinions are okay as long as they're informed, might be possibly the most overrated movement in art. And that's because most people know Impressionism. They will absolutely be able to identify with an Impressionist piece. Especially like when you see people, tourists and stuff, when you're in a place, say, oh, where's the Impressionist stuff? And so that's the only word they know, and so they go for it. But it's a very short-lived movement. It starts in 1874 in Paris, of course. It's led by Claude Monet. It only lasts till 1880. And the goals of the Impressionists was they wanted to paint what the eye actually saw, the impression of reality, to capture that fleeting moment. And that's what they were really after. And so they were painting outside in plein air. They were doing these very quickly, so they have this very sketchy appearance. Look at this Monet. See those brush strokes there? So it fulfills that idea, right? I mean, you see that kind of sketchiness, and they wanted to give that. And this particular piece you're looking at is called Impression Sunrise. And it is the piece that gave the group its name. Claude Monet put this piece into a show in Paris, and the critics scoffed at it, made fun of him. And then one critic said, yeah, it's an impression, all right. It's an impression of a sunrise. And there the group gets their name, Impressionism. They take it. They're like, okay, in your face. We're going to take that as a name. And so they do. Monet was the leader of this small group. And like most of them, this is an urban phenomenon at the time. He's painting urban scenes. And he's also painting a lot of water imagery. He liked water imagery. And water is really beautiful to paint and to photograph. It's especially with the light. I mean, the reflections are spectacular sometimes. And so I do find myself gravitating towards them as well, so I can see the allure. Look at that. I mean, it's just really captivating to see things twice. The image here and the image here as well. And sometimes I think that one is way more interesting. He was so captivated by water that he actually had he called it a bateau studio, a boat studio. And he would paint and float on the water in Paris and the Seine River and paint and do his art. It was soothing, I'm sure. He is most known for his images of water lilies. These are a series of works he did. This is the garden in his yard. And Monet began to just paint here because he was losing his eyesight. He was familiar with this topic, and so he'll paint it again and again. There's many, many of these, and some of you may have seen these before. Monet was the only person who remained a true proponent of Impressionism. Throughout his life, he never gave it up. A much more vivacious painter was certainly Pierre-Auguste Renoir. Renoir's life was, he documented it through his paintings. He liked to be out and about, and he was very interested in a good social life in Paris. And he's also very, very influenced by the camera. We can see that when we look at a Renoir. The imagery, look at here, and this part of the image. It's very much like a photograph. You know, when you take a photo, you guys are very good with, you guys photograph things all the time. And how you cut things off like that, like things bleed off the edge. Very photographic. And so he does see that. We do see that. And many of these people did start to take their own photos. And there he is. He's out dancing and enjoying Paris. He's out having lunch with his friends. There he is. His signature work, though, certainly revolves around his images of women. He does these very beautiful women who are definitely very soft. It's a beautiful lighting. The pink and the rose tints in his work are just lovely. And so if you ever see anything that looks impressionistic and it's a female figure, it's probably a Renoir. He's famous for these. Renoir's work is delicate. It's beautiful. Is it intensely interesting? I'm not sure. Again, I question sometimes, the Impressionists, I think that because they start modernity, they really do start the modern movement in art. I mean, this is the fundamental beginnings of it. They're super important. Is all of their work, as important? I question that. Probably my favorite of the Impressionist group is Edgar Degas. Oftentimes he exhibited with the Post-Impressionists. He exhibited with the Impressionists, but he's identified with the Post-Impressionists. And it's the way his composition dramatically changes the way we look at art. Degas' composition challenges ideas of spatial balance. This is very radically different from what we have seen. He's very influenced by Japanese art. And his work is also very cynical because he believed that the modern period, the way people were living, wasn't that great. How great was being modern? For him, it wasn't that great. It's a lot of isolation. Modernity brings loneliness. We know this. A lot of people complain, to me especially, I hear lots of complaints about feeling lonely. I think that the more connected they are, the more disconnected we are. And I'm talking about from each other. Don't you all feel that? I mean, I know sitting here, teaching in this fashion has definitely made me feel that effect, that loneliness from having the technology. In one way it's good, in another way it's lonely. It's also very obvious, he observes that human nature. Look at this image here, the ballet class. This man and the way he's staring at these girls. He's very interested in some of the more prurient things that are happening. This man looks like he's with her, but look at him staring at them. It makes you wonder what he's thinking about. The ballet lesson. He loved ballet dancers. They're signature works for Degas. So if you see anything with Degas, with ballet, and it's got that kind of sketchy feel to it, that impressionist thing, it's probably a Degas. He also liked horse racing because he liked to gamble. And he liked nightlife. He understood that Paris was about nightlife in those days. He has interesting observations of humans and their relationships with each other. We have here this group of people who look like they might be together, but they're still not linked spatially, and they're not linked with each other with the way that they're looking. Even the dog looks like he's not engaging with them. The only person who looks interested in what's going on here is this guy, and it's kind of creepy from that side, very oblique view of him. We're kind of wondering what's going on. How hard is it to live in this world that's modern. Maybe it's harder than people realize. The drudgery of work day after day after day. You ever punched a time clock and gone to a job that's just so boring? Can't stand it? I mean, what's the answer to that? Maybe that's the rise of addiction. And I think a lot of people, they miss that, but that's when it starts to happen. It's soul sucking to do a job that you feel like you don't love and you're not interested in. And so perhaps, I think that's a direct correlation. She's drinking absinthe. And it's an addictive opiate. The last of the group was that I'm talking about today, there's many more, obviously, I don't have the time to do all of them, is a sculptor, Edgar Rodin. And again, it's all about the way the light moves across the surface. And so his is very much about the patina, the finish. Rodin's pieces are beautiful. He's very well known for being a great caster, but he also does some marble stuff, and it's very beautiful. I saw a Rodin show at the University of Miami one time, a long time ago, and I was not very big pieces. These are not full size. They're small or tabletop, but they're very beautiful the way the light moves on them. And the cast pieces are dynamic. I mean, he just has a handle on how to get the reflection right. It's quite lovely. You're just kind of intrigued. Of course, The Gates of Hell are his most famous piece. And sitting at the top is the one he's most well known for, The Thinker. And I had students tell me that they saw this. He was in the night at the museum. And so he's still kind of a popular image. I'm going to stop for a second. Post-Impressionists felt that the Impressionists hadn't gone far enough, and they felt they had sacrificed form and composition to the fleeting impression, and so they wanted to branch out, and they also wanted to show that other subject matter was equally important, not just nature and everyday life. Paul Cezanne, who's considered the father of modern art, was more interested in formal structure. So we look at him as being more of the intellectual approach to post-impressionism. And he influenced Picasso. And his idea was to use individual color strokes to build up the surface. Color patch theory. He reorganized the picture plane to fulfill his own view of reality. Abstraction is building with the post-impressionists. There's no attempt to, we don't see that idea of perspective and depth. Landscapes were his main interest, especially the image of this mountain by his studio, Mount Saint Victoire. The mountain he painted again and again and again, all in many seasons. There were many different times of the year: winter, spring, summer, midsummer, end of summer. It's just he kept repeating it as he tries to just deal with form and build the surface up. But he's really at the same time, remember he's influencing Picasso, I just said that. He's deconstructing the surface. He's showing and patching it out to show how form can be built up to create the surface. It's not all about making things look real. And I think that's the way we're going. The camera freed artists to move away from subject matter and realism. Art for art's sake. And the Impressionists and the Post-Impressions are at the forefront. These are, after a while, they all start to look alike. But they are all experimentations with this idea of fragmentation. Of course, more famous than Cezanne, who is probably in a way more important on his influence on modern art because of his influence on Picasso and the way he starts to look at the picture plane differently, but more famous, or infamous I should say, was Vincent van Gogh. Van Gogh's was really interested in how the inner heart feels and what the mind feels and knows intuitively. His works are about feelings, they're expressive. He definitely gives a manic quality to his work as he really looks, deep inside into his own strong emotions and feelings. He used strong color, and he was highly influenced by Japanese prints. He was a person who was tortured from the very beginning of his life. Born to a family, his father was a minister who had lost a son the previous year, who they had named Vincent van Gogh. He was then named Vincent van Gogh. That child who had died was buried right there in front of the house he lived in. And so we saw that name on a headstone every day of his life. His own name. His paintings reflect his own struggles, I think. He wanted to become a minister like his father. Unfortunately, his personality was rather tortured, and people didn't like him. In this early image, the potato eaters, the people they were ministering to, he was a lay minister at this point, were miners. They couldn't stand Van Gogh, and they asked the church to recall him. It is then he takes the opportunity to join his brother eventually in Paris. And in Paris with Theo, his brother's name was Theo, Vincent begins to do more art as he becomes influenced by people like Monet. You can see the influence here in this self-portrait. See those sketchy lines? Van Gogh's self-taught style begins to emerge and become more and more influenced by his own, the way his own mentality is emerging, let's put it that way. When you look at a Van Gogh, I have a lot of people who like Van Gogh. A lot of my students enjoy Van Gogh, and I get a lot of papers about him. I know there's a lot of information on him too, but it's not restful. The intense colors, usually full of very strong diagonal lines. This one's a little sedate for Van Gogh, but still an intense color. Very, very influential on the Expressionists, which emerge in the 20th century. But it's obvious that his mental capabilities are deteriorating when you see images of the woman he fell in love with in Paris. Cezanne, she was a prostitute. And you feel there's something going on here. His brother had to eventually force him to leave Paris, and he left and went to Arles, out in the countryside. Van Gogh's dream was to start a artist colony, and he rented a house, Theo giving him money. He never earned enough money to take care of himself. His brother supported him. And in Arles, he lived in the little yellow house. But look at the sewer. Look at the color. Remember, it's not about the external reality. It's about his internal reality. Look at the driving line. I mean, this is just, when I see these images, just the intensity of the color, first of all, is just, it's disturbing in a way, but it's the line that always gets me. It pushes you into the image. You're being driven towards the horizon. It's not restful. And Van Gogh's mental health deteriorates further in Arles. He had by that time been infected with syphilis, and they believed that he was suffering from lead poisoning as well. He was eating paint. Theo reports on that. And plus his own, he starts out in a bad way, so this doesn't help. But here's the little yellow house, his room. Van Gogh's, definitely influenced by Japanese artwork. We see that in his use of, the perspective is skewed. But he's waiting for his friend Gauguin to join him, and that's when the most infamous portion of his life occurs, because Gauguin does join him. Oops, I went the wrong way, sorry. Here he is. And when he does, their relationship falls apart. Some people say it's about, and I've read, texts that it is about a woman. I don't doubt that, about a prostitute, and she was not happy with Vincent, and he found out she was being patronized by Gauguin, and in a fit of rage, when Gauguin comes home, he tries to stab him, and Gauguin gets away, and Vincent turns the knife on himself and cuts his ear off. Here's a self-portrait with that. His brother has to intervene because he's called by the townspeople, and Theo has him committed into a sanatorium. That's a mental hospital, and he does recover. I mean, he paints himself, and his recovery is viable. He gets out. He can't go back to Arles. The town did not want him, but he's still painting. But his mental health continued to deteriorate. And it will end with Vincent committing suicide, the story of Vincent van Gogh. But not before he completes his iconic image, Starry Night. Starry Night is one painting everybody knows of a post-impressionist. And you can see here Vincent's interpretation. I mean, I've read things where he's, he can see the wind. You can see that. And look at the lines. Wait till you see Edvard Munch and the Symbolist. Very influenced by Van Gogh. There's lots of people who are influenced by him. I mean, his color, it's revolutionary. I think he justifies the idea that the artist gets to pick the color. It doesn't have to reflect what's in front of them. If it makes you feel something, that's what matters. His friend that he tried to kill, Paul Gauguin, was also into that color. Here he poses himself as Adam, self-portrait as Adam. You can see the apples. He, unlike Van Gogh, is not, this idealistic person. He's a cynic. He was a lawyer first. Left his wife and went to Tahiti eventually, but not before coming into this mode of painting. In his image, Vision After the Sermon, the grass is red. But it's not because the grass is red. It's because of the intensity of what's happening. It's the angel and Jacob appearing to the Brittany peasants, and they're wrestling. And you see this, and it just is very riveting with the red. It draws you to it. You feel the intensity. And that's what the purpose was. In Tahiti, Gauguin finds what he considers the perfect society, unspoiled by civilization, because he too was very disillusioned by Western civilization and technology and modernity. He will paint a series of images there which do gain him fame. But again, look at the color. This is an image that near the sea, Fatoumata Temita, and he is switching reality, or the way reality looks. Again, you can't discount them and the way that they change the palette for artists. The post-impressionists may have had a bigger impact on the 20th century than the impressionists initially did. Symbolism at the end of the 19th century was driven by the new anxiety of the ending of the century. Edvard Munch was one of the most famous symbolists living in Norway. Munch felt that anxiety to a very great level. He was depressed from his sister's death. His loneliness in the city of Oslo comes through. This is his take on Mary Magdalene. And he uses, like Van Gogh, lines and color to express that. It's darkness, it's anxiety, it's loneliness. No painting is greater at showing that, there's another one of his works, than this one. And this is his signature piece. The scream, the shriek, the cry. And it's called all three of those things. It shows his anxiety, his loneliness, his feeling that one day he felt like he lived in a city and he realized he didn't know anybody and nobody heard him. And look at the figure, it's a cadaver. He's worried about death, the end of the world. You know, the end of the century always brings this kind of end of the world feeling for many people. And Munch was certainly one of them. And look at the lines. Doesn't that look like Van Gogh? I mean, you feel it. And again, that strong diagonal. Until we're at the end of the 1800s. And we will be moving into the 20th century after this.